being in front of a group of friends, it really makes you think a lot more about how you share. And I'm not sure I'm going to do anything particularly different to normal, but it's been a good reminder for me that I think some of the benefit of sharing an idea is actually just hearing it, but I think a lot of the benefit is often in the reflection and the conversations about it afterwards. So one of the cool things about a group like this is I think it's something we can do a lot more easily, and especially if there are things that maybe you have different perspectives on, or ideas where maybe your own stories overlap with some of them, I'd be especially keen to continue conversations afterwards about this too. I guess picking a little bit of an idea to share today, there's a very high chance that it's going to sound a little bit common sense, and I'm hoping that's very much the case, but especially for a community like the one that you guys are continuing to grow and entering a new chapter with. This particular idea, I think, is one that has been challenging for me over multiple chapters of life, and I think can be really valuable getting a little reminder of as you guys grow together, because I think it's a really, really big part of healthy communities. So I guess, guys, I might start off with a little reflection or story from a period during my hospital times as a medical student. We often go through this stage where, after doing a couple of years of the usual textbooks and lectures, we start following more advanced doctors on their ward rounds. We see patients together, help write the notes, help with the smaller tasks, and basically learn in a protected environment, kind of on the job. And I'd like to describe myself, probably at the time, being a very conscientious, pretty diligent student. I was learning so much every day, but despite that, I was very acutely aware that there was so much still that I didn't know, and you really feel like the baby on the team being guided every little step. There was a particular woman we had on our patient list during this period who was quite elderly and came to hospital with a lung disease. It was a pretty severe lung condition. She was coughing profusely and had been there for many, many years. Once we'd finished going through all our morning jobs, one of the consultants suggested, Sam, go have a chat to this woman, find out a little bit more about her condition, see what you can learn. And that's something we'd often do. In fact, I still reckon it's probably one of the best ways to learn medicine is often just to talk with people and hear their stories. So there, the young, enthusiastic medical student I was, with a clipboard and a little pen in hand, knocked on our room and invited myself in. And even from the door, you could see this woman was really uncomfortable. She was short of breath. She was coughing profusely. And I sat down next to her, looking at her really frail, fragile figure. So many years had been used up with energy just directed towards continuing to breathe. And she had the oxygen supply being delivered through her nostrils. There was a cup of mucus next to her table, nearly full with all stuff that she'd just coughed up that morning alone. I knew a little bit about her condition, or at least enough that I knew there wasn't an awful lot that could be done for her. There wasn't a cure. And there I was, a young medical student, just here to learn. And one of the strongest feelings I had at the time is that there was nothing that I could offer this woman. There was barely even any hope that I could give her. I was just there to receive. And there are many times throughout life where I know I've felt that kind of a way before, especially around feelings of not knowing enough, not having a certain job description, not being old enough, smart enough to do things. And here I was again, having those same sort of thoughts. There's nothing more I can do for her. So I started with the things I knew I could do. Ask the standard generic questions. What's your name? How long have you been in hospital for? What's brought you to hospital? I see that you're coughing a fair bit. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Or what's been the story of your breathing difficulties so far? And on they went. I'm going to come back to this story, but we're going to go to one from the Bible that's got a few overlaps with it. A couple overlaps in the sense that there was nothing more that anyone could do, or so it seemed. And technically, you could even stretch the case to say that it was about a breathing problem. It's actually about a man named Lazarus in the Bible who he kind of stopped breathing. So there's a solid chunk of the Bible that goes through this story. And for the sake of time, I might ask a little favor if you guys give me the benefit of the doubt to summarize it. But if you haven't read the full story before, it's in a part of the Bible called John chapter 11. If you guys do have a Bible, it might be worth opening just to that chapter because there is a bit of a verse I want to focus on from it. But the summary of the story is that Lazarus was a man really well respected in a town called Bethany. He had two sisters whose names are Mary and Martha, and this family were really, really good friends of Jesus. It seems with how many times Jesus is described in the Bible as being in this home, it was probably even a bit of a source of refuge. So at the very least, they got along very well. At one particular point in time, Lazarus fell quite ill, and at the time Jesus was quite a way away when he heard the news that Lazarus was so sick. And Jesus did something quite interesting. He delayed his return to Bethany so long that Lazarus, in fact, passed away. And it was 4 days after Lazarus' passing before Jesus went back to Bethany to visit this family. You know, by this time, Lazarus was beyond dead. He was probably starting to rot. It was a circumstance by all accounts that there was nothing more anyone else could do. And Jesus entered this town of Bethany, saw a scene of absolute heartbreak. There was Mary and Martha who were weeping and mourning deeply. And there was in fact a whole community that had gathered to mourn the passing of a respected member of the community. And Jesus comes into this town knowing something that no one else did. And I'm sorry, especially if you haven't heard this story before, to spoil it like this. It's 100 times better reading the whole thing, but the story ends that Jesus actually raises Lazarus from the dead. There's one part of the story, though, I find a bit of a puzzle, and I was maybe hoping we could just read through this passage in John chapter 11. I don't know, guys, when you do this, is it right if I maybe even ask someone else to read this part of the Bible? Is that okay? It's actually verses 33 to 55 of this chapter. If someone's comfortable reading those three verses, would really appreciate that.
33 to 55.
Sorry, 33 to 35.
Wonderful.
Sorry if I said it wrong. Thank you very much.
I can read it as well. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying?" Oh, sorry, I went way too far.
That's all right. All good. No worries at all.
Sorry.
Extra juice in there. Every bit of it's good. Now, I don't know if anyone else sees the irony here, but Jesus sees the most sad scene. He knows that just in a couple minutes there's going to be a happy ending to this scenario, and yet despite that, he weeps. Just to put this in perspective, this is probably about to be one of the most incredible miracles of Jesus' time here on earth. Probably second, you could make the case, only to him resurrecting from the dead himself. It's really an incredible celebration is about to take place. All these people who have gathered as a huge sign of mourning are about to be having a party in just a few minutes, and despite that, Jesus weeps with everyone. Now, there's very likely a couple of reasons why this happens, but I just want to share one with you. And it's, I think, a reason that's not only a key to understanding this story, but a very valuable principle we gather from the Bible that has the potential to affect all our relationships in life, and especially as a community desiring to follow God and sharing love with the world around us. And I guess the summary, or maybe the snapshot word, is sympathy. And I guess sympathy is an expression or a feeling of sincere concern for someone who's experiencing something difficult or painful. I think it's very commonly interchanged with words like compassion, understanding another person's grief. In many ways, I think sympathy is a description of what love might look like during times of people's pain. And here Jesus displays that sort of compassion, even though he knows that things will have a happy ending. He goes through the same journey as Mary and Martha, even though he knows that very shortly their tears will probably turn into tears of joy and laughter. So I think from like this short passage, as well as a few other parts of the Bible, there are three key things that I think are maybe worth reflecting on with this story. I don't know, Fred, whether we've got a slide by any chance. If not, that's completely fine with the sympathy one. Is that up there?
Yeah. Oh, no.
No, if not, that's okay. All good. We'll do it with good memories. I think there's three little points. The first one, and probably the most important, that I think everything else builds on, is the reminder that God has sympathy for us. And it's an incredible thought to think of, that even though God knows that things will work out in the end, you might remember parts of the Bible that describe all things will work out for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. We have these promises, and God knows that things will work out ultimately. Yet despite that, he shares the parts of our lives that hurt. And sometimes you may have the reflection or the picture of God presented that things will be okay in the end. God promises us that, and we have to keep our part of the deal, and the rewards coming down the track. And it's a cold-hearted bargain that God strikes with us. And I think if that's sort of the approach that we've maybe been hearing, I want to leave this story as a really strong reminder that God actually cares. That even though he has the answers, he has compassion when we don't know what to do. Oh, awesome. Thanks so much, Fred. They're just the quick summary points. I was wondering if maybe someone would be happy to read 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 3 to 4. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, and then verses 3 to 4. If someone's got it, feel free to read that.
So 2 Corinthians chapter 1, 3 and 4.
Thank you, Lizzie.
Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort those who are in any trouble with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God.
Thanks so much, Lizzie. God as our comforter is the sort of picture we see here. I think it's not too far-fetched to picture a God who sheds tears for the pain that we as individuals go through, whose stomach twists when injustices happen in our lives, who cares about our anxieties and the things that we worry about as well. God shows love in the face of our sufferings and struggles. And I just want to remind you of that God cares, that he knows, and that he'll walk with us through those difficult times. I think one of the reasons that's so important is as sort of the key point to take away from today is because of some of the ripple effects that has. I guess on that verse that Lizzie very kindly read for us, we read that it doesn't stop there, or that it shouldn't stop there. The end of that verse describes that God asks us to extend that same sympathy and comfort to others, which is, I think, the second key point I want to leave with you today. There are 3 verses I was hoping we could read, so maybe if I could have 3 very, very gracious volunteers. The first one is Galatians 6, verse 2. Is someone happy to take care of that one for us? Thanks, Darwin. The second one is Galatians 6, verse 2. And the second one's Romans 12:15. Anyone happy to take care of that one for us?
Yeah.
Thanks, Henry. Romans 12:15. And then the last one, 1 Peter 3 verse 8. 1 Peter 3 verse 8. Is anyone happy to read that one for us?
Yeah, I can.
Thanks very much, Janelle. Down when you're ready, Galatians 6 verse 2. That'll be great.
Galatians 6 verse 2, it says, "Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ."
Thanks heaps. Really appreciate it. Heinrich, Romans 12:15.
Verse 15. Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep.
Thank you. And then 1 Peter 3 verse 8, Janelle.
Finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another, love as brothers, be tender-hearted, be courteous.
Awesome. I think some very basic Christian principles, but worth remembering that I think when we haven't internalized the idea that God actually is sympathetic to us, it can be very, very difficult to extend that same kind of love to others as well. And yet we're called to do that. And I do want to acknowledge that we can't all carry everyone else's burdens, and there may very well be people during stages of life where maybe all they're being asked to do is to lean in on God to carry what's happening in their life. But I think for most people, as a generalization, for most times in our life, we'll have opportunities to at least help carry another person's burden. And I think having a mindset that's open to that, that's looking for those opportunities, and to be that love in the face of other people's pain is a very Christian calling that comes straight from God. The third little idea that I want to leave with you, I guess, is maybe a little bit of a relationship that sometimes can happen between sympathy and knowledge, confidence. We'll maybe flesh that out a little bit more. But I don't know whether you guys have had this sort of reflection before. One thing I've noticed as a personal vulnerability of mine is that it can be harder to show sympathy when I feel like I've got all the answers and have things all made out black and white. Some classic maybe examples of this are the thought of, if they just stopped smoking, their life would be better. If they maybe use their money on this instead of that, their life would be far better off. Or if they stopped doing this in their home situation would improve drastically. And maybe to put that in a more real life context, just to reflect on one scenario that I've come across that got me thinking is, if you had a 60-year-old man who's been smoking for most of his life and was recently diagnosed with cancer of the lungs, and next to him was a 60-year-old man who's never smoked a cigarette before and also has lung cancer, where do you think your sympathy would naturally gravitate towards? Exactly, the one who maybe had no control, just bad luck. And yet, if you take maybe the picture of God that we've kind of described, God reflecting on that situation, where do you think God would gravitate his sympathy towards? Would there be any difference? I struggle to see how he would favor one or another. They're both his loved children. And maybe it's that their problems throughout life have been very, very different, and their struggles have had very unique paths. And while a lot of the ideas we have around what's right and wrong, or what's destructive and beneficial, are 100% true, and in no way does our sympathy change the fact that smoking is a choice that has damaging consequences, to suddenly pull away all our sympathy because of that, or remove the need to, I guess, express love in the situation of someone suffering, doesn't necessarily take the same approach I think we read of in the Bible. Maybe one way of phrasing it that I think strikes me regularly is that so often in life we carry very oversimplified solutions to very complicated problems. And as we do that, we have this tendency to lose sympathy. Yet when you look at Jesus' life, he had every answer to every single problem, and yet he didn't lose sympathy for a single person. I'm just going to repeat that again. We often carry oversimplified answers to very big problems and naturally tend to lose sympathy. Yet Jesus had every answer to every problem, and he didn't lose sympathy once. Maybe it is that as we learn more, sometimes the confidence we carry that naturally comes with it means we have this tendency to lose sight of God's love for others in certain situations. And I think that's especially relevant as there are so many things that I believe the Bible carries that are a huge blessing to the world around us. And our world would be so much better having a chance to see those things, not only heard, but especially in action. Yet, despite how powerful and good these truths are, I think if we go out into a world aiming to share them without a heart of sympathy, we can actually do a lot more damage than good. And sometimes we might not even carry the safest mindsets to do that. And so I want to leave that little challenge to, even when things all look black and white and the solutions look very clear, as well as that might be, don't forget to show sympathy as well. Be that love in the face of suffering. Back to that hospital room. This elderly woman continues to get a barrage of questions from me, probably as a bit of a pestering medical student. How much phlegm do you cough up each day? Do you have any heart problems? Have you ever smoked? After a while, I don't quite know how it happened. The conversation changed in its nature. We started to talk a lot more about her family. She shared about her late husband and the many years of marriage that they had together. The conversation continued about her children, her grandchildren, and she reflected on which ones look like her, which ones have personalities that are so out of character with the rest of the family. And by this point, the clipboard and the pen were down. She began to tell a bit about where she lived, the roles she'd held at work, and some of her most special memories. And I noticed that we weren't talking about her disease anymore. We were talking about the things in life that she valued, the blessings that she was reflecting on. There were just small prompts encouraging her to continue sharing. And she shared as well some of her fears of being in hospital and briefly opened up about her faith. And as soon as we got to that, an instant air of peace entered the room. I honestly don't remember, and I swear on this, I honestly don't remember how the conversation ended that day. Times just eroded that part of the experience from my mind. I don't know if there was a prayer that we shared after she accepted the offer. I don't know if it was an encouraging word. I don't think the detail matters all that much, in all honesty. But what I do remember is that the conversation, which lasted probably an hour, changed that day for that woman. I remember when I walked in, her being distressed and anxious and leaving to an air of much more peace. And that a woman who felt very afraid and alone knew that the team that was looking after her cared. And what also struck me is actually how little I'd actually given to this woman. I couldn't offer her anything physical. In fact, most things hadn't changed at all from an hour earlier. She had the exact same illness. She had the exact same treatment and the exact same prognosis. And yet what a difference that little bit of time and sympathy made for her was striking. As I got home that evening, it wasn't lost on me the irony of the actual visit. I was a student who had absolutely nothing I could offer this woman, extremely underqualified, lacking in a whole lot of skills, and yet in that 1 hour, which I believe was only by God's grace, sympathy had probably changed the course of that woman's day more than any medication could, more than any type of surgery, and more than any specialist service available in the hospital. And I think that's a good reminder for me, and I hope a reminder for you as well, that there are so many times in life where we feel there's not much to give. We don't have the right training, or can't find the right words, where we haven't learnt enough. And I want you to know without a doubt that as long as we carry that same love that Jesus carried in us, that we remember the sort of care he showed, the sympathy he expressed, and that he also shows to us. That if we show that heart full of sympathy to the people we meet, then there is an impact we can make on the people around us that's hard to compare with many other sorts of impacts. There will be times where you can bring healing that a doctor can't. There will be times where you can awake hope in people who haven't been able to see that themselves, and maybe even give people a glimpse of God that they haven't been able to see yet. And I guess with that, I want to leave the final challenge with you to go with God, especially as hard as it is for some of the people that sometimes frustrate us or are hard to get along with. So go with a heart of sympathy for everyone we meet and be the expression of love in the face of pain to them.